Athletes these days, youth these days, how about saints these days? What does it look like to draw close to Jesus and live as Catholics in our increasingly complex, confusing world? We're Susanna and Krysanne, promising no cliches, just honest conversations, personal stories, and insights into issues that affect us as modern Indian Catholics. Welcome to Saints These Days. In last week's episode, we heard about Krysanne's story moving from an LGBTQ identity to an identity as a daughter of God and a faithful Catholic. In this week's episode, we want to talk a little more about how we as Catholics can reach out to those who are struggling with same-sex attraction or those who identify themselves as LGBTQ. So first of all, let me reaffirm the Church's position. This is directly from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It says, basing itself on sacred scripture, which presents homosexual acts as acts of grave depravity, tradition has always declared that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. They are contrary to the natural law. They close the sexual act to the gift of life. They do not proceed from a genuine affective and sexual complementarity. Under no circumstances can they be approved. The number of men and women who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies is not negligible. This inclination, which is objectively disordered, constitutes for most of them a trial. They must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives, and if they are Christians, to unite to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross the difficulties they may encounter from their condition.
So, if I were to summarize what you just read, Susanna, it is not a sin to experience same-sex attraction or even to identify as gay. And so basically something that you cannot control is not a sin. And that initial attraction, that basic attraction that rises up from somewhere within us is not really something we can control. It's very similar to when you're having an argument with someone and you experience this burst of anger inside of you, right? Where does it come from? Can you preemptively squash it? No, it's there, right? And so it's not really something you can control, and therefore it's not a sin. But it is a sin to engage in homosexual sexual behavior because it goes against God's plan for our bodies and relationships. And so you see these two truths that kind of balance each other out. That it's not a sin to experience homosexual attraction, but it is a sin to act on it. And people in the church have not always differentiated between these two truths. In fact, I did not hear these two truths when I was asking my questions as a teenager.
In my experience in the Indian Catholic Church, most people like to pretend that this struggle just doesn't exist. I don't think I've ever heard a homily that even refers to it. I have heard some people give talks about it, but in a very us versus them way, where the gay agenda or like there are these people out there who are enemies of the church. I've never heard anyone in the church acknowledge that there are actual members of the church who might themselves have experienced same-sex attraction, and way before getting anywhere close to sin or sexual activity, that these are real people, real persons who are going through this, and that this attraction might have affected them in many ways without having anything to do with sin.
And another approach that I see from within the church is this kind of hyperfixation on this particular sin, almost as if it's the worst one that one might commit. And I don't see the same kind of zeal for denouncing other sins or even other sexual sins like sex before marriage or even any sexual behavior outside of marriage is a sin. And I don't see the same kind of attention given to these sins, almost as if they aren't as important as the sin of acting on homosexual attraction.
Just a reminder, all sin is bad. All sin hurts our relationship with God. All sexual activity outside marriage goes against God's plan for our bodies. That includes like masturbation, the looking at porn, like all of those things which definitely happen within the church, like within members of the church. All of those things are as bad. It's not like this is a worse sin. And yet, all of us, all those who might have fallen into different kinds of sin of all types, that for all of us there is a possibility of redemption, no matter our temptations, no matter our attractions, no matter our sexual orientation.
And then, of course, on the other side, there are many Catholics who are happy to endorse everything that the gay movement promotes, using the tagline "Love is Love," which in a previous episode, I even shared about how this is something that I believed when I was younger. And there are many who don't want to be branded as homophobes and or bigots, so they kind of overcorrect in the other direction and completely endorse everything that the LGBT community stands for.
Right, I don't want to be known as a homophobe. And yet, the truth of the Catholic Church sometimes makes people think that we are. So I think a lot of people would rather not know or talk about what the Catholic Church actually teaches, because it sounds like you probably hate gay people because you cannot endorse same-sex marriage or relationships. So where is the approach that is faithful to the truth as shared by the Catholic Church, passed down directly from Jesus, and yet the approach that realizes that part of truth is reaching out pastorally to gay Catholics who have real struggles and real questions? Let's talk a little more about your perspective, Krysanne, because we're not talking about this just theoretically. You have been right in the middle of all of this. And I want to ask you questions based on your personal experience. So what would you say? What are some of the ways that you wished people in the church had used to reach out to you?
So in the previous episode, I shared about how when I was in my early teens, I asked this question a lot. What does God think about gay people? And this question was coming from a very personal place. And so I sometimes asked the question anonymously. But there were times when I did ask it to people who, like my confirmation teacher, and people who could have, shared with me the truth. And I wish that someone kind of realized that this topic was really personal to me and maybe sat down with me and said, hey, what's the story here? What's really going on? Is there something that you want to share with me, something you want to talk about? But no one really did that. And in fact, no one really looked at the intention behind the questions and spoke to that. And they just used every question as an opportunity to restate a part of the truth, which is that, homosexual behavior is wrong, but failed to kind of share the whole truth with compassion. Another thing that I witnessed a lot growing up in the church with this experience is people using a lot of us and them language. I attended many talks where people talked about the LGBT community out there with their nefarious agenda to get our children. And I don't think those people really realized that I was a Catholic with same-sex attraction and that they were indirectly talking about me. And it was really hurtful for me to kind of hear that rhetoric where people just kind of forgot that the LGBT community is made up of people with experiences and struggles. And I just felt so alienated by the way that they spoke about me and about my friends. And thirdly, I wish that people in the church had shared the full truth of the church's teaching with me. Not just saying that, that it's wrong to act on same-sex behavior, but given me the tools or the answers for how I'm supposed to be living my life as a Catholic with same-sex attraction. Because no one really told me what I was supposed to be doing with these attractions. Was it a mistake? Did God make a mistake when he was making me? I wanted to know these things and no one told me.
Yeah, I feel like every time I've heard people talk about any of this, there does not seem to be any awareness that it's quite possible that the people listening to you in your audience, in your parish, in your youth group, in your prayer group, that there's quite possibly people in this group who are going through it right now and that you're speaking to them and about them, not about someone out there. So this is a suggestion. If anyone here is listening to this podcast and who is in a position of ministry or leadership within the church, if you first of all, talk about it. It's good to talk about these issues and struggles. But when you talk about them, just talk to the people in your audience and say, if this is you, if you are struggling with this, God loves you, I love you, and I'm happy to listen to your story and to answer your questions. And I would love to hear from you. Please contact me later.
That would have gone such a long way if I heard it when I was younger. I'll tell you that.
All right. So the next question, Krysanne, is what were some of the good ways that Catholics did reach out to you?
That's a great question. So the first thing that happened is that I finally received the full truth of what the Catholic Church teaches when I was 19 years old. And actually, Susanna, you were part of that. You came to my youth group and you conducted the session called Love, Truth and Homosexuality, where you basically shared the paragraphs from the Catechism of the Catholic Church detailing what the Church teaches on this topic. That's the first time that I learned that the Church makes a distinction between the attraction and the act. And the second thing that helped me was that I read The Theology of the Body when I was 21 years old, and that answered a lot of the questions that I had about why the church teaches what she teaches about this topic. And that book was recommended to me by a really good friend. And that was also another really good thing that happened. And the third thing that helped me, which I think was the most helpful thing, is that I was blessed with really good and solid friendship with other women in my life who knew my story, they knew my struggle, they knew that I experienced same-sex attraction, but they didn't treat me any differently because of it. They shared their lives with me, they didn't keep me at arm's length, but they were in touch with me, they loved me, and they treated me as more than this one aspect of my life that I had shared with them. And that friendship was so beautiful. It was centered on Jesus, and it was so healing for me.
Yes, I think one of the big things I've realized in general in any kind of pastoral ministry in the church and missionary work is that we have to reach a place where we see people as more than their sin, and we see them as people, as beloved children of God, longing for love, longing to belong, longing to experience God's love. And the problem is, for a lot of us, we think that the only place we're going to experience real love and belonging is a romantic relationship. And that's not actually true. If you look at the real world out there, that's a small percentage really of people for whom that's their ultimate calling, where they're experiencing everything that they need and want through a romantic relationship. But that's where we go, and that's what we look for. And so I really feel like the need of the hour, especially when we're reaching out to people who have these particular struggles, is to create more of a sense of community within the church. And this is not something that the Catholic Church, unfortunately, is known for or very good at yet. We can very easily be mass-going parishioners who are there for years without experiencing deeper, intimate friendships or community. And so I think this is something we need to grow in. We need to grow in creating opportunities for people to plug in to small groups, to lay communities, to different forms of retreats, different ways of being community where you actually meet people, you feel loved by people, you have people with whom to do life, right? And where they can experience the love of God. We can't live in isolation or just little cliques. Sit behind our phone screens and pronounce opinions or judgments on the sins and struggles of others. We have to form community and invite people into this community where they can experience love and where they can experience repentance, where they have an opportunity to draw close to God and figure out what His plan is for their lives.
And Susanna, the really interesting thing about community, I think, is that we want to invite everyone to be in community with us. And this means, I think maybe for many Catholics who feel very strongly about the church's teachings on homosexuality, is that we don't really want people with these experiences to be part of our community unless they kind of publicly renounce what they believe, or they publicly kind of publicly declare a belief in what the church teaches. We don't want them near us or part of our community. And I think that if we want to really respond to what the church teaches us, then we want to include these people in our communities, in our friend groups, in our small groups, even in our retreats, even if they haven't completely repented of what we think they believe.
And the fact is, we don't actually know a lot of the time what people really believe or the actual sins in their life. Someone might be right in the front of your youth groups, being like the youth group leader, and that person could be, sleeping around, doing all sorts of sexual stuff that you have no idea about. So I think it's probably in general a good idea not to make assumptions about people's either their beliefs or their sins, unless of course they have made a public statement of it. But in general, to draw people in, proclaim the truth, but love them where they are. All right, Krysanne, I wanted to ask you a sort of controversial question. What is your perspective on LGBTQ rights and activism? Is there a need for such things? Is there a place for Catholics in things like gay pride marches or any other kind of activism?
So I do not think that pride marches are a good place for Catholics to go, primarily because the LGBT community has an all or nothing approach to pride or LGBT activism. And by being there, just your presence is kind of implicitly supporting all of these things that they stand for. So let me just kind of distinguish, let me kind of explain what I mean. So there are parts of the LGBT message that we as Catholics want to support. And that's basically this this desire that they have to be loved, to belong somewhere, to be loved especially by their families, to have friends, to have community around them. These things that the LGBT community asks for, to be treated with respect, to be not discriminated against, to be treated justly, all of these things are things that we should support as Catholics. That's precisely what the Catechism of the Catholic Church tells us, is that we are meant to be treating these people with love and respect and sensitivity. But on the other hand, there are certain aspects of their message that we don't completely endorse, and that's basically the desire, the demand for gay marriage, for example, the demand for homosexual activity to be celebrated and encouraged is not really something that we as Catholics agree with. That's not how we view sex, and that's not what God's plan is for our bodies and for our sexuality. And so we only want to endorse some of their message, but not all of it. And that's why I think that, going for a pride march is really hard to introduce nuance when you're like marching in a pride march. You can't very well carry a poster that kind of details your entire view on this matter, because it'd be like a 2,000 word poster and no one would ever read it and you won't like really accomplish anything. And so I just think that it's safer to just kind of not march in a pride parade.
I think it's helpful though not to condemn people who do, because one of the things I've realized over the years is when they use the word pride, first of all, I don't think it's, the sin of pride that people are talking about. I believe from all that I've read and understood, it's a desire to be seen and known, to be treated with dignity and acceptance, to cast off shame at one's very existence, right? I think a lot of people just feel like it is shameful that I exist, and that is not true. It is good that you exist. It is good that you exist. And if that's the motivation with which people join it, I'm not going to condemn that. At the same time, as Krysanne said, there's definitely prudence in not appearing to endorse things that we do not endorse. So I do think that instead of just being against pride events, we need to be willing to speak up as Catholics for the things we do believe in, right? And sometimes that might mean publicly saying things like on our social media pages, definitely in our personal relationships. We should be the ones standing up against people making jokes about gay people or bullying gay people, using the word gay as an insult. If we know that people are struggling, we should be trying to help them get access to help, to therapy, to ways that they can speak up and not feel embarrassed or ashamed to share their struggles. We need to let people know that they belong, that they are loved by God, and that they don't need to hide.
Yeah, and I think that as Catholics, we need to lean into that message. We don't need to, constantly be reiterating the parts of their lives that we don't, support. I think it's okay to just tell someone, I love you, I'm here for you, I'm your friend, you can lean on me, and not have to, constantly, tell them what parts of their lives we don't completely agree with. I think it's fine sometimes to just be there for someone.
Right. So being a friend, be a good friend. It doesn't matter whether people are sinning from the point of view of whether or not you can be a friend to them. You can be a friend to someone who is struggling with all kinds of sins, and it's still your job to love them. And I think that's something that we can all do and that we should do. Don't keep your distance, draw close, draw near, in whatever way you can. You don't have to endorse things that you don't endorse, but you totally can show up for them. All right, so what do you think about using the word gay or someone calling themselves a gay Catholic versus I'm a Catholic who has same-sex attraction?
So, unpopular opinion, I don't actually think that there is a right or wrong here. I think it's completely up to the person. I don't think calling yourself gay is a sin. That's not something that I personally do. I identify as someone who experiences same-sex attraction, but I would not call myself a bisexual Catholic as I have done in the past. And the reason for that is that I don't really believe that I am a bisexual Catholic. I believe that I am a beloved daughter of God who is loved by him completely and who sometimes experiences a huge array of struggles, and my same-sex attraction is one of those struggles that I experience, but it is not my identity and it's not how I see myself, and that's not how God sees me either. So that's not why that's why I don't call myself bisexual. But I do sometimes use that label. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll probably see that I sometimes call myself an LGBT Catholic or a bisexual Catholic. That's because Instagram only gives me 90 seconds to make my point, okay? And sometimes for the sake of brevity and clarity, I might occasionally use the label. That does not mean that, I see myself as that. It's not a core part of my identity. And I also feel like sometimes people use this distinction to kind of accuse people of being unfaithful Catholics, like, oh, you call yourself gay, you call yourself bisexual, that's not really who you are, and therefore you're like, sinning or you're misleading people. I think that we need to move away from labels and just look at the experiences and the people behind these experiences rather than using these labels to kind of condemn people or kind of push them away.
Yeah, I think that there are probably a lot of people who do use it not to proclaim that they believe in same-sex marriage or any of that stuff, but just to say like, hey, I am Catholic and I do experience this, and that they want other people to know that too. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and that's something I think up to each person's personal discernment. So Krysanne, for those of our listeners who may struggle with same-sex attraction, do you have any advice or message?
So the first and the most important thing I would say is speak to someone. Open up to someone that you trust about this struggle and know that you are not alone. My advice is to talk to someone who you trust and who also loves the Lord and who loves Jesus, who is trying to be a faithful Catholic. Because this way you'll get good advice, not advice that kind of comes from the world, but advice that is rooted in faith in Jesus. And so maybe like talk to someone who's a little older than you, maybe someone who takes their faith seriously, maybe even a priest friend that you know. Share the struggle with them, ask them to pray with you. My DMs are open. So if you would like to talk to me, I'm Dal Rice Fish Fry on Instagram. You can message me, I will respond, and I'm happy to pray with you. The other thing that I want you to know is that you are not alone in this struggle. I'm in this with you. There's so many other people who are in this with you, and there is a place for you in the church. You and I are called to be a saint. And the last thing is that if you have questions about this topic, it's really good that you have questions, first of all. It's not wrong to have questions, but don't stop there. Look for answers. I suggest reading The Theology of the Body for Beginners by Christopher West. There's a bunch of other recommendations that I have that I'll probably put in the description of this episode, but definitely go looking for answers. And the church has a wealth of beautiful reasons for why she teaches what she teaches. And so embark on that journey, and I think it will really be so beautiful and transforming for you.
Awesome. So thank you, Krysanne, for your vulnerability, for your willingness to share. This is so personal. It's not something just theoretical, and it takes courage to be able to open up like this. And I pray that your openness and this episode will bless those who have similar struggles, will help them to know that God loves them, that we love them, and that they're not alone. And I also pray that this episode will help those of us who are in positions of leadership within the church, any kind of pastoral role, that we have a lot more sensitivity and a willingness to meet those having these struggles with real love and compassion.
Alright, so thanks for listening to this episode of Saints These Days. You can follow us on Instagram. Let us know if you would like to be added to our broadcast channel, and share this episode with someone who you think would enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.